Good morning, St. Kitts and Nevis, and welcome to another edition of Inside the News. I am Jeremy Abel. As usual, it's Saturday morning, and I'm keeping you company. It has been a very busy news week for us, both locally, regionally, and internationally. But this morning, we will be taking a look at, excuse me, we'll be taking a look at the inauguration, the impact of a new US president and the return of Donald Trump to the helm of the US politics and what are the implications for us in St. Kitts and Nevis and across the Caribbean region. We have also seen that he has already signed several executive orders and more are expected to come true. But before we do that, I want to introduce my guests, Andre Huey. Andre Huey, um, you know, news director, CEO, and so forth of SKN Newsline. Andre, good morning.
Hi, Jermaine. Good morning. Thanks for having me once again.
All right, thanks for joining me. I know last weekend we had a very engaging discussion
hmm
regarding the year in review and so forth. But before we do jump into the discussions this morning, before we jump into the discussions this morning, we have to acknowledge our partners who make the program possible. And then when we return, we'll go straight to Donald Trump.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Need to get your goods to St. Kitts and Nevis? Look no further. TDC Shipping has you covered with reliable cargo solutions by land, air, and sea. Whether it's a package from across the world or a large shipment of goods, TDC Shipping makes it easy, affordable, and stress-free. And with our Airbox service, ordering from your favorite online stores just got even easier. Ship straight to your mailbox and let TDC Shipping handle the rest. Fast, secure, and even to your door. Visit us today at the C.A. Paul Southwell Industrial Park or Penny's Industrial Site, or call 465-2511 in St. Kitts or 469-5430 in Nevis. TDC Shipping, where reliable service meets unbeatable convenience. TDC, together we succeed.
People make the world go
And we are back, here on Inside the News. Like I said, we are going to be discussing the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Andre, in our little realm in the media, we have colleagues locally, regionally, and internationally. And during the campaign, we were all focused on the general elections in the United States. Many had their perspectives that it would have been a Democratic win. Many conservatives felt that Trump had it. Um, when I was covering it, there were two bottom line issues that we recognize that were critical to this. One, immigration, and two, the cost of living inflation. And the inflation was a trickle down effect from the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's start here. What's your assessment of the whole election cycle now that resulted in Trump now winning and being inaugurated?
Well, you raised a very interesting point there, Jermaine, about the cost of living, which obviously is a major um, factor in any election. And we have a clue, not to segue too much from the topic, but there are going to be a number of Caribbean elections in the Caribbean, at least five or six happening this year. And you would imagine that inflation and the economy is going to play a role because every country across the world is dealing with the challenge of high inflation, including St. Kitts Nevis. So you would imagine that the elections in Trinidad, in Jamaica, and Guyana, that's going to be happening later this year, and other places across the Caribbean, that's going to come as a factor. So it will be interesting to see if incumbents are going to, retain office, especially in light of what we see happen in the U.S. Now, as it relates to Trump being inaugurated, I was listening to I don't remember which network it was on, but one of the interviews probably was NBC or one of them. And actually, no, it was News Nation, and they were interviewing Congressman Humphreys from New Jersey, and he made the point that a lot of the executive orders none of the executive orders that Donald Trump has signed so far has really addressed the core issue of high inflation. Of course, we don't expect things are going to happen overnight, but he did sign quite a few executive orders, and in Mr. Humphrey's view, none of those address the issue of inflation. So we'll wait to see what happens in the coming days. But obviously, the big talking point this week has been immigration, and the fact that he promised that he was going to address the issue of illegal undocumented migrants. He has started that. We've seen ICE has already started the immigration raids. They're reporting over 300 plus per day so far. The big one was also in Boston this week, where, according to reports, a number of alleged gang leaders were arrested. Gang leaders from parts of Central America and Haiti were arrested. So it's very interesting times, and we just wait and see what's going to happen.
Interestingly, that you mentioned that yesterday's or last evening's newscast, national news in the US, they reported 500 cases the previous day, right? And I just want to explain to the public that, just excuse my voice. I had a little cold that I was dealing with, so it's a little off. But this particular issue of immigration and the raids that we're seeing right now, do you believe it's a political stunt? And the reason why I asked that question, and stunt in quotation marks here, because when there was the influx of migrants on the borders, specifically Trump and the governors of the Republican states, the Republican-led states, they bust a lot of these migrants to Democrat-controlled states in terms of governorship, gubernatorialship. Now, those raids are actually being conducted in those particular states, which kind of begs the question: what is the end game here by making this a national issue as it is when you started this previously?
Yeah, well, it probably is a political move. They're sending a strong political statement to their political opponents, the Democrats, that they're taking immigration seriously and that they're going to do what they promised their voters. The thing about it, German, is that the immigration issue is a very complicated one in the United States, and I'm kind of torn whenever I discuss the issue, because on one hand, you would like to see opportunities there for persons who come to the United States, and we always hear the discussion that they should come there legally, and I agree, and I think immigration laws are there for that purpose. In any country, you want your migrants or people who come to your country for a better life, you want them to come through the legal means. But you also have a situation, especially in this part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere, in South and Central America in particular, where there are a number of countries that are, and in the Caribbean, if we include Haiti in the mix, a number of countries that are experiencing political turmoil, they're experiencing really difficult and harsh circumstances that require a little compassion, if you want to use that term, in dealing with, because you're going to have people who are going to come in droves and try to get into the United States. I think one of the problems, and one of the major problems the United States has, and this is something that some pundits have discussed at length after the election, is that part of the reason why you're seeing Donald Trump and the Republicans going this hard line against immigrants had to do a lot with what transpired in the last administration, where it is reported that I think they said over 14 million illegal migrants were allowed to cross the border, the southern border. When you have a situation like that, when there's a large influx of migrants, you do one of two things, actually more than two, but I'm going to highlight two. One, you create a situation where the citizens of the country, a majority of them or a good portion of them, harbor some disdain for for migrants, and unfortunately, you have persons who are law-abiding who really, the only law they would have broken is the immigration law. They just want a better life for themselves and their families. But then you find these people are being lumped into this category of the ones who are also criminals, who cross the border, who have criminal intent. And some of the people who were reportedly arrested by the immigration control officials this week, quite a few of them were indeed involved in gangs or had criminal records. So you have that one situation, a disdain by citizens and residents, for immigrants and for migrants. And that's unfortunate because, again, like I said, not everyone who crosses the border, or not everyone who comes, in or overstays your visa, and we have quite a few of that from the Caribbean. Not every one of them, have any ill intention. They just want a better life for themselves. So you have that situation. One, you have a influx of people coming in. So you have, some of the public infrastructure, the public amenities are being strained. And you have situations where, I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that they're taking away jobs, because truth of the matter is, if you do the survey, you check the data, the jobs that these migrants are taking are jobs that Americans are not doing. And they play a very pivotal role in the economy. So you're going to have a situation where if you have mass deportation, you're going to have aspects of the economy being negatively affected. So there are a lot of factors that go in play where that's concerned, and it's something that is going to require a lot more in-depth analysis other than just picking up people and deporting them.
And as you mentioned that, I remember bits and pieces of what the IMF said recently, but that's for another discussion later down in the program, right? They basically talked about the challenges that can be had surrounding the U.S. economy if this migration issue and tariffs are put in place, and stringent immigration measures and deportation and so forth. But again, we're gonna pick up that point a bit later. But before
we go further, Jermaine, I just want to make the point as well, just in the interest of balance as well. So on one hand, you're talking about the possible repercussions that mass deportations could have on the United States, both from an economical standpoint and even socially as well, socially and humanitarian, from the humanitarian aspect, because you have families who are going to be torn apart as a result of this. But you also have to look at it on the other side. The people who supported Donald Trump, and I said earlier, you have people in the U.S. who have harbored a disdain for migrants because of this large influx that came in the last 4 years. And this is something I've seen firsthand. I was in New York a few years ago, maybe in 2022, and I was speaking to someone who basically, I was in a public place, a bus terminal, and there were a number of migrants, or people who were believed to be migrants, who were just lounging around, sitting on the chairs. Quite a few of them taking up a lot of space in the building, and the person was very, disturbed. He was like, these people come here, they come here illegally, they get opportunities, and they're making demands of residents and citizens who live here. And he found that to be quite distasteful. So this kind of mentality that people have towards the migrants, I think, was also one of the reasons why Donald Trump won, and won by such a large margin, because there are people who are genuinely concerned about, whether or not their opportunities are being denied to them, or things are they're not getting certain opportunities that the migrants are getting. And so they feel, they harbor this disdain towards them. And so that situation, I think, is also playing a role in the government's decision to do what they're doing now, because at the end of the day, people are going to say, well, we have immigration laws. These laws are to be respected. And, we can't just have a free-for-all. So on one hand, while you will have some repercussions from the mass deportations, the other argument is, hey, we're a country of laws, and we need to abide by these laws.
And I agree with that, because a lot of people, and let's be frank, most people in the Caribbean have a liberal view of what is happening. Most of them, quote unquote, support and show support with the Democratic Party, but we're not seeing it. We're also not seeing it from the Republican perspective of that the country itself has laws and so forth. But I want to play a bit of what Trump said during his inauguration speech, and and we can go from there, because I think a lot of what was said in there actually guides his principle and his thinking towards his mindset of where he wants to take the country. And I think this is what people also need to understand, that every administration that comes in with their own policies. A lot of people may not agree with it, right? We in the media, we have our own personal views and perspective on it. But again, he got the votes for a particular reason. And I think that's what a lot of people are not understanding, because, yeah, half the voting population voted for the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, while the majority voted for him. So let's hear a bit of what he had to say during his inauguration speech.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country, sunlight is pouring over the entire world, and America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens, while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad. It fails to protect our magnificent, law-abiding American citizens, but provides sanctuary and protection for dangerous criminals, many from prisons and mental institutions that have illegally entered our country from all over the world. We have a government that has given unlimited funding to the defense of foreign borders, but refuses to defend American borders or, more importantly, its own people. Our country can no longer deliver basic services in times of emergency, as recently shown by the wonderful people of North Carolina, been treated so badly. And other states who are still suffering from a hurricane that took place many months ago. Or more recently, Los Angeles, where we're watching fires still tragically burn. From weeks ago, without even a token of defense, they're raging through the houses and communities, even affecting some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in our country, some of whom are sitting here right now. They don't have a home any longer. That's interesting. But we can't let this happen. Everyone is unable to do anything about it. That's going to change. We have a public health system that does not deliver in times of disaster, yet more money is spent on it than any country anywhere in the world. And we have an education system that teaches our children to be ashamed of themselves in many cases, to hate our country despite the love that we try so desperately to provide to them. All of this will change starting today, and it will change very quickly. My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their freedom. From this moment on, America's decline is over. Our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history, and I've learned a lot along the way. The journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again. That is why each day under our administration of American patriots, we will be working to meet every crisis with dignity and power and strength. We will move with purpose and speed to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day. It is my hope that our recent presidential election will be remembered as the greatest and most consequential election in the history of our country. As our victory showed, the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda with dramatic increases in support from virtually every element of our society, young and old, men and women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, urban, suburban, rural, and very importantly, we had a powerful win in all 7 swing states, and the popular vote, we won by millions of people. To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true. Is now returning to America, and confidence and pride is soaring like never before. In everything we do, my administration will be inspired by a strong pursuit of excellence and unrelenting success. We will not forget our country, we will not forget our Constitution, and we will not forget our God. Today I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. We will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release, and I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorists, and by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions, and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it. We will bring prices down, fill our strategic reserves up again, right to the top, and export American energy all over the world. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago. And thank you to the auto workers of our nation for your inspiring vote of confidence. We did tremendously with their vote. I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before to restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government. My administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America.
Yes, there you had it. There you had it. That was a bit of what the President of the United States had to say during his inauguration. What are your take on some of the agenda items that he outlined there? I know this has been big talk over the last week in terms of ending the birthright citizenship, immigration, and so forth, but he's prioritized the economy as well, ensuring that jobs return, companies manufacture stuff in the United States, keep everything at home in order to bolster the economy. He's also prioritized, quote unquote, again, bringing down the inflation. What's your take on what he has outlined there?
Well, I think we'll probably discuss more the economic proposals or the economic plans he has a little later on when we talk about his speech at the World Economic Forum. But what I will say, though, on this before I move on to the other topic, is a lot of economists and experts have said that the tariffs and a lot of the things that he plans to introduce is actually going to do the reverse of what he wants to accomplish in the United States, unless, of course, he means he's going to move all the manufacturing around the world to the United States. Now we know that there are some challenges and some barriers to that, because one of the reasons why a lot of big corporations around the world do their manufacturing in Asia, and more specifically in China, is because of the cheap labor and the fact that they can get things produced in China at a much lower cost than if you do it in the United States or in this part of the world. So that's going to be a tough sell. I don't know how he's going to manage to do that, but again, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll discuss more of that later on when we start to talk about his speech at the World Economic Forum. As it relates to birthright citizenship, now this one I find quite interesting. For the record, I believe that a child that is born in a country, whether they're born to undocumented parents or they're born to citizens or permanent residents, that child should be a citizen of that country. That's my personal opinion. I found out when this story came up this week, and this was new to me, so this is something I had actually learned, that there are only like 33 countries in the entire world that gives automatic birthright citizenship, meaning a child is born in the country, they become a citizen. St. Kitts and Nevis is one of those countries. Quite a few Caribbean countries, when I did the research last night, quite a few of those Caribbean countries are in that category. The English-speaking Caribbean, Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua, Barbuda. Almost all, if not all, of the English-speaking Caribbean countries have that provision in their citizenship. So once a child is born, whether the parent is from that country or not, they automatically become citizens. Interestingly enough, a lot of the European countries are not. In fact, none of the European countries are on that list of 33 countries. So it's mostly the countries in the Americas, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, and of course the United States and Canada that are in that list. So I find that instructive. So essentially, if President Trump is successful in getting this birthright citizenship removed in the way he wants it, of course, it's based on the reports. There's some challenges from some states, some legal challenges. So it's not going to be immediately implemented because it's gonna suffer some setbacks. But if he is successful, if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and he manages to get this happen, it's going to be some very interesting time, because he's actually going to be joining the majority of countries around the world that don't have this provision. So this is not something new that President Trump is coming with. But the reason why I think it's going to be problematic is that you have a number of immigrants living in the United States who are not permanent residents. So basically what he's saying, just to bring people up to speed, what the law is intended to do is only persons who are parents who are citizens or who are permanent residents will be able to have their child get automatic citizenship if that child is born in the United States. The challenge with that is that you have a lot of immigrants in the United States. You have a lot of undocumented migrants living there. I think one study showed that this year that 4 million U.S. citizens who are born in the United States, who have birthright citizenship, have at least one parent that is not from the U.S. or who is undocumented. 4.4 million, I believe it is. That's a lot of people. Now, you will have a challenge in getting this, the practicality of this law implemented. The other aspect of it too is that you have people who are living in the U.S. from countries that don't have friendly diplomatic ties with the U.S. or don't have any consular services in the U.S. Now, if a child is born to a Venezuelan, for example, there are no consular services in the U.S. because of the ongoing situation between America and Venezuela. What happens to those children? They won't be able to acquire Venezuelan citizenship because they were born in the U.S. and there are no consular services in the U.S. to provide them citizenship of Venezuela. So you're going to have a lot of stateless, and I'm sure there are other countries as well in a similar situation. So you'll end up in a situation where you will have a lot of stateless children living in the United States. That can't be all as well for the country. So there are a number of teething challenges that they're going to have to implement this law. But I just found it very interesting that majority of the countries in the world, majority of independent countries across the world, do not have automatic birthright citizenship. So you could see why President Trump is probably going down this road.
But in all fairness, though, the countries that, and the majority of those countries, and we can speak for those in the Caribbean, many of those countries that have birthright citizenship are actually those who are actually colonialized, one. And two, many of those countries in Europe, and this is just me speculating here, and this is my opinion, um, don't have this because you have a lot of quote unquote migrants coming from Africa and these places
Right.
who want to settle in these particular locations. And because of that, they're afraid of again, and this is way back in slavery days, and I have my opinions on slavery as well and repercussions after that. But because of these issues of more blacks coming to these parts, it's easier for you to get that done. The UK now, again, they don't want to be overrun, quote unquote, by a lot of blacks and slaves and so forth. So it was difficult for you to get citizenship. And a typical example of that would be the Windrush issue, particularly
Right, exactly.
there. Right, but we'll take a quick break now, Andre, and then I want to continue after the break on this particular issue of birthright citizenship, because this is something that's impacting us in St. Kitts and Nevis and people across the Caribbean. So we'll be right back.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, so we are back here on Win FM. You're in tune to Inside the News. I'm Jermaine Abel, as per usual, and we have with us the all-rounder himself, President of the Media Association, CEO of Palm Branch Media, editor, manager, owner of SKN Newsline, Andre Huey himself. And we're taking a look today specifically on Donald Trump's inauguration. What does that mean? 1 week in office, he has already been ruffling feathers and making critical decisions impacting the United States and the rest of the world. One of those decisions is his executive order surrounding birthright citizenship. He signed that executive order to rescind or prevent illegal migrants and their children from, well, their children being born in the United States from obtaining citizenship. In that executive order, he noted that one parent has to be either permanent resident or a citizen of the United States in order for them to obtain a passport. Andre, this has been, and we all know this. This is something that a lot of people in the Caribbean do. You're pregnant, they get a visa, they come up to the United States, they have their children. To an extent, it's illegal, and to an extent, it's not illegal, right? How do you believe this specifically is going to impact us going forward now that a decision like this has been taken, and the fact that it has been put on a pause by the courts, the Donald Trump's new executive order?
Yeah, it certainly is going to have an impact. As you rightly said, Jermaine, there are a number of pregnant women from the Caribbean, St. Kitts and Nevis no exception, who travel to the United States to have their babies born there so that they can acquire U.S. citizenship and, by extension, acquire some of the advantages and benefits that comes with U.S. citizenship. That, of course, is going to change. If this law is allowed to stand, it's definitely going to remove that possibility. One of the main reasons why the Trump administration is pushing this to, and it's to a point you made earlier, Jeremy, before the break, where birthright citizenship is not prevalent, is not allowed in Europe. There are some exceptions, of course, but the exceptions are similar to what Donald Trump is proposing in this law, which is In France, I know it's the case in France based on the research I did, and also I think in Germany, if one of the parent is a German citizen or French citizen, or one is a permanent resident, or legal resident rather, the child acquires the citizenship of Germany and France, which is exactly what the US is trying to do now with this new law. The other thing, and so to the point you were making earlier, Europe maintained that status quo and removed birthright citizenship, or didn't allow it as it was in the US, because of the migrants and coming back onto slavery. And you have a situation where a lot of African migrants are going to Europe, going to Spain, going to England in particular, and those particular countries. So by removing that possibility, it protects their citizenship, so to speak. There is a provision, I was looking at on NBC where some legal experts were weighing in on this issue. And they were making the point that there's a section in the amendment, the 14th Amendment, which is what allows for birthright citizenship, where it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States. Now, apparently this particular clause, this particular section, is what the Republicans or what the government is challenging, is using to support their point that birthright citizenship is not automatic. So they're saying essentially that person born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction. They're saying that an illegal immigrant or undocumented person who has a child in the United States is not subject to the jurisdiction because they're not a citizen, they're not naturalized. So they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And because of that, their child does not get automatic citizenship. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, so when this gets to the court and when it gets to the appeal court and the Supreme Court, we will see how the courts would interpret this section and whether this section indeed is not guaranteeing birthright citizenship. But until then, it's definitely going to impact, as you say, German, the privilege that persons previously have of going to have their children in the U.S.
But that's funny how you put it there. I'll be not an attorney because I've been hearing a lot of people weighing in on this specifically. And I think one of the things that is actually a bit confusing here, and it has to be, let's take a step back. When they're talking about you don't have a status within the country, for some, especially those who cross the border illegally, there is no record or any information of you within the system, which means that one, that you broke the law to cross by crossing the border illegally, so you enter the country illegally. So there's no information or any data, as I said, data about you. So that's where part of this issue and challenge comes. Then now you have the other side of it, where if it's a case that we don't have anything for you, right, then how is it possible that we can record your child in the system when we don't have anything for you? So basically, and this is going to be sound really bad, your child fell out of the air, some bird came and just dropped the child. So how do we register them as being in a state, as against someone who, quote unquote, and this again is based on what I read, is partially illegal as well, where people conduct birth tourism, where you come, you get your visa, your B1, B2, you travel up to the United States and you get your child, right? It's vastly different in that case as against someone who entered the country illegally, has no status, we don't know about them, but then they have a child. So I think that is where the complexity comes when we talk about this whole issue of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment there. I know some will argue that it speaks for itself, right? Maybe when they...
And that's why I quoted that section, because I think that is a section that both the Democrats and the Republicans are going to battle in court with, because they're saying that the person is not subject to that jurisdiction by means of them being undocumented or even being a visitor. Because again, I guess that's the key point there. If they're a visitor, they are legally in the U.S., but does it automatically mean that they have a child there, that the child becomes U.S. citizen? It reminds me also, Jeremy, remember, this is not the first time we've had this particular issue, because you have also a situation, this is not in the U.S. though, this was closer to home, in the Dominican Republic in 2010. Remember, there was a constitutional amendment that was made that denied birthright citizenship to children who are born in the Dominican Republic to parents who are migrants or who had irregular status, particularly the Haitians, because Haiti and the Dominican Republic shared borders. There was a case, I'm looking at a case from, as reported by the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Center. They reported of a young lady who was born in the Dominican Republic to Haitian immigrant parents who had been recruited across the border to work at a sugar company, at the sugar company in the DR. At the time she was born in the Dominican Constitution, she was guaranteed Dominican citizenship. But when they made the amendment in 2010, the constitutional amendment, where children who were born in the DR to Haitian parents or parents who did not have a status and removed their citizenship, their citizenship was revoked. She challenged the matter in court, in the Dominican court, and not only did they strip her from they upheld the decision of the lower court, they also went as far back retroactively to strip citizenship of persons who were born since 1929. So every person was born in the Dominican Republic since 1929 to Haitian parents or to Haitian immigrants who didn't have a regular status in the Dominican Republic. They stripped their citizenship. They go all the way back to 80-something years ago. Long and short, of course, when that happened back in 2010, it was a huge outcry across the Caribbean from some notable people who said that this was a racist and this was a xenophobic law, and it was against human rights. The UN also came down on the DR. Eventually, they made some amendments, but it still maintained the core essence of the law, which is if you were born in the Dominican Republic to Haitian parents or any other parents, and you did not have regular status, you were not automatically granted citizenship of the Dominican Republic. So this is something that is it might be new for the U.S., but it's not new across the world. And right here in the Caribbean, we've had our own experiences.
And you are correct there. You're definitely correct there. Just one correction. At some point in time during your discussion, Andre, you did refer to the EO as being the law. So I just wanted to correct that. The executive order.
It's not a law, but there is a legislation that is before Congress right now. As a result of the executive order. So yes,
so it's just a presidential directive to take certain actions. Yes, I was reading a document recently, and the United States Congress, through the State Department, they were making several updates and amendments and suggestions in terms of how they should approach people who are, more specifically, because men can't get pregnant, women who are pregnant, and the reasons why they were traveling up. And they're very, very particular about it, oftentimes, and I don't exactly remember at which period in the pregnancy, but most times it's difficult for women who are later on to be able to travel into the United States, because oftentimes it is seen that they're traveling for that particular reason, to have their children here. But it's not illegal to an extent to have your children being born in the United States, but there are two facets to the problem. One, if you are going to travel specifically for the purpose of having your child become a US citizen, then that is one problem. And two, if you are going to be dependent on the state or state funds, then that in and of itself is going to prove a challenge for everyone who seek to undertake such directive, right? So yes, that is one of the issues that we have here when it comes to this particular topic of birthright citizenship and so forth. So it's a very peculiar matter, and I think that the challenge that we're going to have is, how do you clamp down on this without impacting countries broadly, right? Because at some point in time, they may have some visa restrictions in terms of people being able to travel freely because of this issue. Because I've known people being complaining in the first Donald Trump term that they were getting difficulties in obtaining visas to travel to the United States because of either the overstay rate in the country or the birthright issue, which a lot of people capitalize on.
Yeah, well, I think one of the ways in which you could probably gauge that, I don't know if this is an accurate measurement, but the U.S. You always have every year there is I don't know if that's going to continue now on the Trump presidency, where you have the U.S. green card lottery, which is done by U.S. Immigration Services. Essentially, is basically giving persons an opportunity to earn or to get permanent residency in the U.S., them and their family, if they go through the process without them not previously living in the U.S. Normally, when you try to apply, if you're from certain countries, you would probably not be allowed. There are only certain countries that are eligible to participate in the green card lottery. And usually the countries that tend to have a high rate of persons overstaying their visas, or maybe a larger population of those persons from those countries living in the US, they tend to be not eligible to participate in the green card lottery. So maybe that's a gauge. I'm not sure. I don't think St. Kitts and Nevis falls in that category. If we were to say, well, you have a large percentage of Kittitians and divisions overstaying their visas. One, because we're a small population, a small country, so I highly doubt that. But again, we'd have to look at the records to see. But there are some countries in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, for example, that would not be eligible, and probably because of that very same reason, because of the high rate of persons from Jamaica who are probably have overstayed their visas. I heard another news program I was watching recently from Jamaica, where they account for about 1 million Jamaicans living in the United States. And I'm assuming that 1 million, maybe a portion of that is living legally and the rest aren't, but it is estimated to be about that. So obviously, a country like Jamaica probably would be in that category.
And I would suspect, just quickly to add to that, I would suspect that rate is probably more than 5% or thereabout. And I think once you reach a certain threshold, it becomes more difficult for you to obtain these visas to travel specifically. And that's one of the challenges that people have been encountering from these larger territories because of that particular rate.
Right. Yeah. So I think that plays a role. But overall, though, we will have to wait and see. I think that, and based on what the Trump administration has outlined, they're starting with the hardened criminals when it comes to deportation, and then they're going to also go to persons who would have overstayed their visas. And if you just happen to be in the vicinity of the raid when a criminal gang leader is being picked up, as we saw this week, and you too have overstayed a visa, you didn't commit a crime, you've been law-abiding except for the immigration law that you broke, you too would also be rounded up if you are caught. And we've seen that happen already this week.
Well, I as you mentioned that, I have an attorney at law, an immigration attorney, African Caribbean. She's going to be playing a little bit deeper, probably at the bottom of the hour, the 11 o'clock hour, where she's talking about that specifically, what people should know. She's basically urging them to know their rights when it comes specifically to this issue of raids and being held and so forth, right? Yeah. So yes. But let's move quickly over to Donald Trump. It's a little lengthy, but we almost finished the first hour. It's a little lengthy. His speech at matter of fact, that is World Economic Forum. But I want to play first the economic outlook from our good friend Mr. Olivier from the IMF, where he gave a perspective of the world economic outlook. The world economy is expected to grow by 3.3%. So I'll let him speak to that specifically, and he touched a little bit on the United States perspective of their growth and the challenges that some of these towers and so forth can have on the country.
In our latest projections, global growth remains steady at 3.3% this year and next, broadly aligned with world potential growth. Inflation is declining to 4.2% this year and 3.5% next year in a return to central bank targets. This means that the very large global disruptions that started with the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and triggered the largest inflation surge in 40 years are behind us. This is the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. While the global outlook is broadly unchanged from October, divergences are widening. Among advanced economies, the United States is stronger than previously projected, expected to grow at 2.7% this year. By contrast, growth in the euro area is revised downwards and will increase only modestly to 1% in 2025, reflecting low consumer confidence and the persistence of high energy prices, especially relative to the United States. Elevated trade policy uncertainty will contribute to anemic demand in many countries, including China, where we project 4.6% growth this year. Some of the divergence is structural. For instance, the US experienced persistently stronger productivity growth than Europe, especially in the technology sector, linked to a favorable business environment and deeper capital markets. Among emerging economies, potential growth has decreased for China, in line with secular and demographic trends, but it has increased in other emerging markets, and the two are now comparable. Turning to the risks, economic policy uncertainty is elevated, with likely policy shifts from many newly elected governments in 2024. In the near term, risks could exacerbate divergences between countries. The euro area could slow down more than anticipated due to weak momentum in manufacturing and fiscal vulnerabilities in some countries. For China, the risks are also to the downside. The economy is at risk of a debt deflation trap, and the decline in Chinese government bond yields shows rising investor concern. Both for the euro area and China, this could lower activity and inflation. For the US, many of the uncertainties originate with potential policy shifts under the new US administration. While these are hard to quantify precisely at this stage, we would categorize them as follows. First, there are demand-stimulating risks, such as a further fiscal stimulus or a confidence boom fueled by expected deregulation efforts. These would increase output and inflation in the near term. There are also supply-constraining risks, such as higher tariffs or curbs on migration. These would weigh on output, but also add to price pressures. The combined effect on output in the near term is uncertain, but likely to the upside in our assessment. Any combination of these policies, on the other hand, is likely to add to price pressures in the US. Higher inflation would prevent the Federal Reserve from cutting interest rates as initially planned. These policies will also likely strengthen the dollar and tighten financial conditions elsewhere, especially for emerging market and developing economies. In the medium term, the risks are more uniformly to the downside. Curbs on migration and protectionist policies will weigh on potential output. The initial positive effect of a fiscal expansion will wane, and the associated increase in public debt could lead to fiscal vulnerabilities further down the road. The increase in US long-term yields, despite the Federal Reserve easing, reflects some market nervousness about future fiscal policies. Deregulation could boost output by removing red tape and spurring innovation, but it could also increase financial vulnerabilities. Another risk is that renewed inflation pressures so soon after the recent episode could de-anchor inflation expectations as people and businesses have become much more vigilant. Indeed, we see that near-term inflation expectations have increased above central bank targets. Turning to policies, given this environment, central banks should remain vigilant and be ready to act forcefully if inflation were to break out again, while also monitoring carefully the buildup in financial risks. Second, fiscal buffers need to be restored now, and countries need to do so in a way that preserves growth. As history teaches us, delaying needed adjustments in a low-growth, high-interest rates environment can trigger market loss of confidence that would further add to fiscal pressures. In addition, countries should continue to seek ways to improve growth by focusing their efforts on ambitious structural reforms that will help better allocate resources, increase government revenues, foster innovation and competition. On that front, it is also important to preserve and improve our multilateral institutions to help unlock a richer, more resilient, and sustainable global economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre-Olivier.
Well, there you had it. There you had it. That was the IMF's World Economic Outlook. Just a little bit there from Pierre Olivier.
If
We
you
are
need protection, you need one who you can trust. To secure your investment, you need one who'll do you just. TDC Insurance, we're the one that you can trust. TDC Insurance, you're always safe with us. TDC Insurance is your go-to insurance company for all your insurance needs. We take pride in offering you the best solutions and ensuring our customers are fully satisfied. TDC Insurance, we take good care of you, guaranteeing you peace of mind. You're always safe with us.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib, it's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
And we are back here on Inside the News. We are actually joined by Mr. Schneidman Warner, economist, accountant, you name it, he's there. And he will give us a little bit of insight. Mr. Warner, good morning. In terms of, we have, now that Trump is president, you heard some of the discussions. What is your perspective on the impact, the possible impact of Donald Trump's new presidency on territories like St. Kitts and Nevis and the broader Caribbean region?
Good morning. It may seem rather a broad statement, but the impact of Donald Trump on the world, as he has demonstrated in some of his proclamations and threats, is that he intends to be a bully for the next 4 years. And if he can get away with it, enforce his bullying. I get this point really to go back a bit, since I joined the program rather late, to the birthright citizenship issue. Like Mr. Huey, I am not a lawyer, but as I've heard the issue discussed, the emphasis in this is about that, well, the emphasis, as many people in St. Kitts and Nevis and the Caribbean concern, is the right of someone who is in the United States of America and gives birth, whether or not that child acquires United States citizenship. The point that the lawyers have been making is to emphasize the simplicity of the sentence. Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. If only the laws of St. Kitts and Nevis were as simple language and as short sentences as that. Anyhow, the emphasizing part there are that all persons born or naturalized. However, the section that says subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now it means even if someone is not the citizen, even if the parent is not a citizen of the United States, the person who is born there is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Just because your parents are not American citizens doesn't mean that you don't have to obey the laws of the country. Doesn't mean that you can drive through the traffic lights without respecting the red. Doesn't mean that you can kill someone. Doesn't mean that you can do whatever you please. The fact that you are in the United States, you are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, the reason why this section of the Constitution and the application of it excludes a certain category of people, namely children of diplomats of other countries, because those persons are not subject to the laws of the United States. It's the reason why they park with impunity. It's the reason why they commit certain crimes. We discover that the laws of the United States protect diplomats of other countries. It's a universally applied principle. Someone living in a diplomat of Brazil living in St. Kitts find themselves exempt from the laws. They commit certain things and they say, look, you can't do anything about me. They get on a plane and they leave. And so this is about saying that all persons who are in the United States, not how you got in there, whether or not you got there legally, whether or not you smuggled yourself across the border, you came in as a visitor with a lawful visa. The fact that you're in the United States, you're subject to the laws thereof. They're not gonna, just because you came in unlawfully, when you rob someone, just send you back across the border. They take you to court, charge you, and then later on, if they choose to have you deported, but you're going to be prosecuted, you are subject to the laws thereof. I disagree with the interpretation that says it's because other countries don't have this law. No, it's because Donald Trump and many of his supporters want to change it. The majority of Americans do not have any issue with birthright citizenship, because many of those people are themselves subject, because their parents came in whether lawfully or unlawfully into the country. Well, let's concentrate on lawfully. And their children are citizens of the United States of America by birth. It will affect us in that many people won't be able to do that anymore. Yes, embassy, even though you have a valid visa, when you get to the border, the immigration official, just because you have a valid visitor visa, doesn't have to let you in. They are allowed to exercise their own discretion. And so someone turns up at the border, evidently 8 months pregnant, the consular official could say, well, I don't think you're really coming just to be the immigration official can say to them, I don't think you're coming just for your vacation. I think you're coming so that you can have a child born in the United States, and has the discretionary powers whether or not to let you in. It will mean that fewer people will seek to go to the United States. But let's emphasize this. This is a directive from the president, and all executive orders are subject to the law. The president cannot issue an executive order saying effective this day on. Anyone who killed someone is not subject not subject to the law. So this executive order, which of course has been immediately challenged in court, and the judge who ruled on it said he has never seen anything as blatantly unconstitutional come across his desk in his 40 years on the bench. It seems as if most people do believe that this executive order will not stand. There have been some cases.
But Mr. Warner, do you believe that this specific court challenge, because this has been the presumptive issue here, is that they're targeting illegal immigrants who cross the border, and some will likely have children in the United States, that this particular court challenge is targeting them specifically, with the intentions of it getting to the Supreme Court to basically rewrite the Constitution for them to say that illegal migrants are not necessarily the ones mentioned under this particular section of it, subject to the jurisdiction?
No, I don't. Even though it will affect those persons who cross the border illegally, Donald Trump's statements in the past has been to affect all persons who are in the United States and are not citizens. That this presumed right will apply to all persons, not just those who cross the border illegally. even though you are visiting the United States lawfully, the fact that whilst you are there, if you give birth, the way Donald Trump wants it interpreted, and many of his supporters, is that you shall not be able, that child shall not be able to acquire United States citizenship. Yes, it is one of, not majority of countries in the world do not have such an interpretation, but the United States is unique amongst many in that it does give this privilege to persons born in the United States. It is not just aimed at those who cross the border illegally. It is aimed at anyone who's in the United States who is not a citizen or a green card holder and gives birth, that their child shall not become a citizen automatically.
And while you're right with that, Mr. Warner, and I agree with you that that's precisely what he wants to achieve. One of the catalysts behind it, though, was indeed the illegal immigrants, because an undocumented person who has a child in the United States, that provides some, for lack of a better term, shield for that undocumented immigrant of sorts, because they have a child that's born in the U.S., so it kind of anchors them in the U.S. in a sense. So in the process of trying to remove all the loopholes or the things that can keep undocumented immigrants in the U.S., this law comes into the full focus, and by extension, it affects those who are just visiting and want to have their children in the U.S.
I do agree with that, and we've heard the term use of anchor babies. That is what many of the
Correct.
critics call them. They're anchor babies for what you just described. On the broader issue of Mr. Trump's proclamations, and there have been so many, and I'm sure they were deliberately flooded so that his critics cannot really concentrate and take hold. The ones that stand out, these outrageous, and I stress the word outrageous, claims that he wants to acquire Greenland. The same principle that Mr. Putin is using in Ukraine, that he needs to occupy that section of Ukraine because they are a threat to the United States, to Russia. Now, Donald Trump is using the same argument that because the presence of Greenland would be for the benefit of the United States should acquire Greenland. This is not 1797. This is not 1825. This is not even 1925. After all, the United States acquired the United States Virgin Islands from the same Denmark in 1917 by purchase. They made an argument and they put up some bluster, and Denmark agreed to sell the United States, to sell the Virgin Islands, then called the Danish Virgin Islands, to the United States. We now have Donald Trump comes along later on and said, well, if you don't sell it to us, we'll just come and take it. God, he's saying he does not rule out military force. Well, this is bullying, pure and simple. You cannot, in this day and age, decide. Just same thing we're trying to say well, not directly, but an imperfect analogy. Venezuela cannot decide that 4/5 of Guyana is theirs, and Guyana must simply back off and redraw the border. Donald Trump is being a bully. With regards to Panama, of course, he has his facts wrong. 30,000 Americans did not die in the building of the Panama Canal. As a matter of fact, hundreds of Kittians were Kittians, Divisions, Anguillians at the time, worked on the Panama Canal. Those of us of a certain age may remember there was a gentleman whose name I don't recall, who used to hang around what was then Barclays Bank, what we now call First Caribbean CIBC there in the circus. He used to hang around Barclays Bank, claiming that he was waiting for his money from Panama. He had worked on the building of the Panama Canal, and he was waiting for his money from Panama. I don't recall his name. I think he lived in the Conwy area. But those of us of a certain age would remember that gentleman. I knew as a child growing up persons who said they had worked on the Panama Canal, and after the construction was finished, they then moved on, some to the Dominican Republic, some to Cuba, to cut sugarcane in those two countries. Some years ago, the National Trust made a presentation that was held at the Central Bank featuring a documentary highlighting the contributions of this document specifically was for people of Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis who had worked on the construction of the Panama Canal. Now, the Panama Canal, let's do some history here. The country of Panama was created as a result of the United States having a desire to build a canal connecting the Atlantic with the Pacific. The land that is now referred to as Panama was previously part of Colombia. The United States of America pressured Colombia and said, we want to be able to build a canal. The Colombians said, we're not going to just hand over land for you to build a canal. First of all, you're going to be cutting our land in two. So what the United States did, the United States supported a rebellion by persons in that part of Colombia, so that with the sole intention that if they did win secession and create their own independent country, the United States will immediately get permission to build a canal. So said, so done. After much pressure and threats of force, etc., Colombia granted independence to that portion of Colombia, and they named it Panama, and immediately gave the United States permission to build the Panama Canal. It took many, many years, but when it was done, as everyone said, as everyone knows, it was run by the United States of America. Jimmy Carter negotiated what had become, they observed and determined, an indefensible situation. How many United States troops will it take in perpetuity to police the canal if Panamanians decide we want our land back? We don't want it to be owned by the United States and run by the United States. And they negotiated in good faith. And in 2000, the Panama Canal was handed over to the Panamanian people, as is so reasonable. There's no provision in the transfer agreements that United States ships should pay preferential rates for use of the canal. There's no such provision.
And the increase in prices actually is because of the drought issue that was affecting the region. So they've increased the prices specifically because of that issue.
Well, not only that, the Panamanians in recent years have widened the canal in order to accommodate larger vessels. One of the things many people aren't aware of, there's something called, I think it's called Panamax, but I'm not sure the term, but anyhow, vessels whose width gives them the ability to travel through the Panama Canal. Many of Americans' warships are built specifically to be able to go through the locks of the Panama Canal. The Panamanians have increased the size of the canal, the width of the canal of their locks to accommodate larger vessels, because they were losing out trade by ships that chose to go down the tip of South America. And so the Panamanians have, since the United States gave up its occupation of the canal zone, they have invested billions of dollars, and every ship is charged the same amount. The fact that the Chinese-owned companies now manage sections of the waterway isn't the same as saying that the Chinese run the waterway. It is like suggesting that that the company that does the private service at the airport runs RLB International Airport. No, they manage the portion that deals with people who are willing to pay for private service to board and disembark from aircraft.
Yeah.
And so Donald Trump, well known for spinning tales that suits his own purpose, spreads this notion about he's going to occupy the Panama Canal. It is not going to happen. But of course, the bully that he is going to do all that he can to get this done. And then, the most ridiculous of all things, Donald Trump is threatening tariffs of 25% against Canada. And yet, the China that he keeps going on and on about, the tariffs that he's threatening them with is only 10%. Is Donald Trump an ignoramus, or is Donald Trump just a big blabbermouth? Yes, it is an attempt to bluster and to threaten, and hopefully, if I threaten, you're going to give something, and I'll get what I want eventually. But that's not the way we run life in the modern era. And it would be a rather shame if the United States, that goes around the world talking about human rights and equal rights under the law, etc., will now be suggesting the world shall be run for the convenience of the United States of America. And when we want something, if you don't give it to us, we're going to threaten you with one form of in one form or the other.
So, Mr. Warner, stick a pin there. I want to ask you, I want to continue the discussion regarding tariffs and so forth, but we have to take a break now. Acknowledge our partners. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. I specifically want to get the implications for small states in the Caribbean, like St. Kitts and Nevis, for tariffs. So we'll take a break now, and then we'll come back and continue with this discussion.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Building supplies, electrical supplies, furniture appliances, carpets and tiles. It's the company where you can get it all. All at TDC, home and building depot. From lawn and garden, the TVs and stereos. All at TDC, home and building depot. Come on down, get what you're looking for. It's all at TDC, home and building depot. People make the world go round.
Yes, and we are back here on Inside the News. We have with us Mr. Schneidman Warner, accountant and economist, and also Andre Huey, journalist, CEO, manager, all things, and president of the Media Association, All Things Media. Just before I go to you, Mr. Warner, Andre, I want to get your take on the tariff issues. Donald Trump, before we took the break, Mr. Warner was mentioning the disparities in the tariffs from Donald Trump, which was a campaign issue that he had specifically geared towards ensuring businesses manufacture, produce everything in the United States. What's your take on that disparity?
Well, as I indicated earlier, the objective of getting everything built in the United States might not be a practical thing for manufacturers, because the reason why manufacturers create their products outside of America and then import them into America to sell them is because it's much cheaper to make them elsewhere. And by making them elsewhere, it increases by reducing the cost of production. You have a better chance of increasing your bottom line and increasing your profits. You try to force everything to be made in the United States, there's certain costs that are just going to be too exorbitant for you to produce stuff in the US. So I'm not sure how practical that is. And again, we never know with Donald Trump, but I don't see it as a practical method. I mean, he did try it the last time and that didn't work. So I don't know what would have changed this time around. The disparity in the tariffs, again, Mr. Warren, I think, kind of coined it quite appropriately that, what the Trump administration is attempting to do is bullet its way through its negotiation, bullet its way through how it's going to govern. And I think this time around, because he has the mandate he has, he's much more capable of getting things done more now than the last time around. And another thing that we haven't really even spoken about yet, I mean, the speed at which Donald Trump has signed these executive orders and trying to get certain things moving, I think has a lot to do as well with the term limit, the time that he has. He's a one-term president in this case because he already served a previous term. So he knows he's not going to get another term. And aside from that, midterm elections are coming up, and that could change things drastically. So now that he has the majority in the Senate and the House, it's in his best interest and the best interest of his administration to try to get a lot of these things pushed through as quickly as possible through the House and through the Senate, because you never know what's going to happen the next 2 years. And generally, we've seen the trend in the United States where you win the party that wins the presidential election tend to lose favorability ratings by the time the midterms come around. And sometimes in the last instance, we saw the Democrats barely holding on, but it might not be the case for the Republicans this time around. It may swing to the Democrats. So he's going to try to push through as many things he can push through now with the limited time he has, and also bearing in mind that he only has a term.
Mr. Warner?
I endorse what Mr. Huey said, in that it's for the reason of production costs. Simply moving the manufacturing of products to the United States of America doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be more affordable. And again, it's a form of bullying. Are you suggesting that everything America wants should be produced in the United States of America? And what is so disappointing is that Donald Trump's supporters either have not learned, not economics, but basic understanding of how the world works. When you import something into your country from another country, and the government places a tax on it, for which the fancy name is a tariff, it makes the cost of the goods more expensive. Let's come to our region. In the region, we have something called CARICOM. What is the purpose of CARICOM? The purpose of CARICOM is to promote trade, amongst many other reasons. One of the purposes is to promote trade amongst the countries of the region. It was preceded by CARIFTA, Caribbean Free Trade Area. So goods manufactured in one country and exported to another do not pay import duties. That's what tariffs are. They are import duties. And so Donald Trump's notion that somehow he's punishing the other countries is balderdash. You cannot find a television set manufactured in the United States. They don't exist. All television sets used in the United States are manufactured somewhere else. The majority of clothes worn in the United States are not made in the United States. They're made in Vietnam and Indonesia and India and China. And so there's no way that manufacturing plants are going to open up in the United States to make clothes because of Donald Trump's threats. Because when you compare the cost of labor in the United States with the other countries of the world, it will not work. And so all that Donald Trump is doing is carrying up the cost of living for the American consumer. The majority of why does the United States have such a huge deficit, a huge trade deficit with the rest of the world? It's because it is more affordable, it is more profitable, it's more economical to have those goods produced in low-cost countries and imported in the United States than to manufacture them in the United States. And let's be fair, let's understand this. The United States consumer market is currently 340 million people. There are 1.4 billion people in China. There are 1.5 billion people in India. The populations of the following countries are greater than the United States. Indonesia, the population is greater than the United States. And so the notion that somehow the world must do its manufacturing for the convenience of the United States doesn't work. Doesn't Donald Trump think that Kittians would like to see the goods that we consume produced in St. Kitts? Of course we would. But it won't be practical to manufacture motor vehicles in St. Kitts for diverse reasons.
So Mr. Warner, as you explained that, right? The broad implications of St. Kitts and Nevis, because we are dependent on everything imports, food, clothes, machinery, household supplies. What does that mean for the ordinary man in St. Kitts and Nevis?
That we are likely to have an increase in the cost of living in St. Kitts and Nevis. After all, a vast quantity of the goods that we consume come out of the United States, whether directly or indirectly. And so that is likely to have that effect. The inflation rate in St. Kitts is not primarily Kittitian generated. It's imported inflation in the form of the price of goods that come to this country. I tell you what, if a manufacturer, and let's recognize the St. Kitts and Nevis market is a tiny market. It's a mere 50,000 persons. There are people who live in apartment complexes in the United States and China and other countries where there are more than 50,000 people. More than 50,000 people can be comfortably seated in Yankee Stadium. The average United States college football stadium holds over 80,000 people seated. So we have a tiny market. But if countries are forced to cut their prices in order to keep the price of goods attractive when imported to the United States, you know what they're going to do? When they are selling it to other countries who don't have the bluster and the power as United States, to increase the price. So something that they are willing to sell to the United States for $100, when they add a 25% tariff on it, it enters the United States at $125. They may say, well, look, to St. Kitts, we'll sell it to you for $110. So we could try and recover some of the money we've lost by selling it cheaper to the United States. And it's not just St. Kitts. To other countries in the world, it's quite possible that they may sell their goods at a higher price in order to recoup some of their costs. If you cannot make it one way, you'll find a way to make it another way. It is not practical to simply move manufacturing as Donald Trump is suggesting. If you want our markets, bring your factories here and let them manufacture the goods here. And after all, this is the same gentleman who has announced that he's going to create something called the External Revenue Service. Again, a lot of balderdash, as if somehow the United States has the power to tax companies in other parts of the world. All right?
Okay. There's a clip I want to play for you guys. This is going back to the discussion surrounding migration, the roundups, and so forth. Andrew, we started to talk about this in the first half of the program. I did an interview last weekend with Miss Nana Gayambi. She's an African Caribbean immigration attorney who's the executive director of a particular agency. And she made several recommendations, and I want you guys to weigh in on this for me specifically. And just for the listeners, in about 10 minutes, we'll take a bit of your calls before we wrap the program. She gives several recommendations, and I played some of the clips during the course of the week, and it was in the news on Monday. In terms of the approach regional leaders should take to to deal specifically with the threat of mass deportations and accepting those migrants. And we saw what happened with Mexico yesterday, where they refused the flight, and senior officials from the Department of Justice are now saying it was a mix-up, which is not necessarily the case to some extent. But we go with the word that they say. So we'll hear what she has to say, and then I want you guys to weigh in on this.
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, and hello to everyone in beautiful Davos.
Okay, I guess
this has been a truly historic week in the United States. 3 days ago, I took the oath of office, and we began the golden age of America. The recent presidential election was won by millions of votes, and all seven, every one of them, all seven swing states. It was a massive mandate from the American people like hasn't been seen in.
You've had a series of marches over the last several months since elections, and it culminates today. Give us a sense of specifically what are the issues that Women's March. Trump is getting in office on Monday. He's promising to do serious immigration, serious deportation. What can the Caribbean community, what can those up here do to protect themselves against deportation?
So the first thing we need to do is not panic. That's what we're trying to explain to people. We have people that are in processes right now who already are reaching out to us to say, I'm not going to keep going because I'm afraid to even show myself in front of an immigration officer, even if it's to adjust my status, right? And so whatever you are already doing in terms of your process, do it. Don't self-deport. That's another thing that they're hoping people will do, that people will just say, forget it, it's never going to happen, and I need to get out of here, and just go back to Jamaica, go back to Trinity, you know what I mean? Just go back to where they come from. And we don't want people to do that. The other piece is to arm yourself with information. Know your rights when it comes to ICE. Know your rights when it comes to the police. With the Caribbean, 80+% of Black migrants that are deported from the Caribbean are deported because of contact with the police. Not because they commit a crime, but just the contact with police that comes from being Black people living in America, right? And so it's important that you know what your rights are. It's important that you prepare your families. If you were to be picked up, who's gonna take care of your children? How are you gonna get into your bank account? BAJI is going to be providing those types of resources, both paper resources as well as webinars, in-person clinics, and we encourage folks to go to BAJI's website, follow BAJI on social media so that you can see when these things are happening, so that you can make sure that you can protect yourselves, our communities, and our families.
Based on Trump's words, should Caribbean leaders be concerned that there will be a large influx of deportees, especially their nationals, many of whom would have overstayed their time? Should regional leaders be concerned?
So here's what's interesting. They cannot deport anyone without the country agreeing. Okay? So if you don't want your people to be deported, then stop agreeing. Stop signing these paperwork, and immediately comes across your desk, you're like, yeah, you're going ahead and signing it and letting people go. Particularly when it has to do with people who have been criminalized. Because we know people sometimes plead to a petty theft because they just want to get back to work. You know, they're not going to get any jail time. They think it's easy for them. They've been wrongfully accused, but, you know, they don't have time to fight the system. You know that if you're a consulate, if you're an ambassador in the United States from the Caribbean. So you should not be going along with it. That is the best way to protect countries from having all of these folks being deported into the country. We have all these ways to throw wrenches into the game, and we're going to be depending on our leaders to do that. If they can take our resources, right? If they can use our people as nurses and in these other positions, we get to follow our people and we get to follow the money that they're taking from our resources. It's an issue of reparations, and we should think of it that way.
Do you believe this is a slap in the face when Trump suggests that countries like the Bahamas, Grenada, Panama, Turks and Caicos should accept third-party deportees from countries like those in Latin America, Honduras, Mexico, China, who are not accepting their nationals back?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, It is a way for the United States to try to escape its international obligations under the asylum law that the U.S. has signed on to. So they want our countries to be co-conspirators in their violations of law and human rights. And our countries, believe it or not, for folks out there, are so about human rights, right? That doesn't mean we're perfect in what we do, but we have human rights commissions. We take those commissions seriously. They do not have human rights commission in the U.S. They don't take human rights seriously. And it's made obvious when Donald Trump says, I'm going to have your country violate the human rights of other people, and you're going to go along with it. And so we should reject that in the same way that we've seen Caribbean countries really stand up to Western powers, really start to look at themselves as having their own destiny and their own agenda. We need to add this as well.
Okay, and finally, even though you make these suggestions, many regional leaders may decide to bow to the pressure. Trump may dangle some carrots in front of them. Or some sticks. How should they prepare for something like this, for mass deportation?
So I think that we have to lean into having a different way that we view people who have been deported. When we talk to people who have been deported to the Caribbean, to African countries, even to like Honduras, the Garifuna, etc., they all report how much they're discriminated against. People are treated like criminals because even though the U.S.'s immigration system is supposed to be a civil system, it's an enforcement system. So you come in chains. I mean, it's not like they give you a ticket and say, hey, you get to sit wherever you want. You come in chains. You come off the plane in chains. In some cases, they put hoods on people. You know, they go out of their way to make you look like you must have committed 1 million crimes in the U.S., and that's why you're here. And we know better, and these country leaders know better. And so how are countries going to really plan for folks to come back in terms of the economic aspect, the emotional aspect, the emotional aspect, and not just the economic aspect? Because I think they think about that, like their remittances they're going to lose. That is not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that you now have people that have been traumatized by a detention and deportation system that is violent and anti-black, who are being, put back with their families and communities. And what will our countries do to address that?
Well, as you said that, many of these countries, small, their crime issue coming out of the U.S., like guns and so forth, are flowing from the U.S. into these small territories. So should the U.S. do more when you start to talk about deportation, whether or not they were coming under Trump's deportation initiative, or generally to assist those countries to have their deportees rehabilitated to an extent, because crime is high in these countries, and to an extent the guns are flowing from the U.S.
Well, yes, that's to some extent. That's where they're coming from. We are now making them in our countries, right? And so that is another piece, and I think we need to lean on, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus, who describe themselves as the conscience of the Congress, right? Come on, conscience, wake up, and let's talk about the ways in which the United States creates even the push factors that have people leave, that includes violence, right? And the way that the U.S. intervenes. And instead, let's take those funds that the U.S. wants to put into militarizing everyone, because they're happy to give our countries money for more military, more arms, more this and that, and instead use that money for care for our community. That they're not so excited about doing, right? And so we're going to need to make that push regardless of whether or not this mass deportation plan goes through, which I don't think it can go through in the way that they've described. But even if it were, even if they got 1/10 of what they were trying to do, we should be prepared to fight them at every point and to demand that any harm that results, that they repair now. We're not going to add that to our long list of reparations that we want. We want to deal with that today.
So, yes, there you had it. That was Ms. Nana, doing a sit-down with me recently to explain what specifically regional leaders should look forward to or should implement to deal with these particular issues, this particular issue of not necessarily reparation, but rather the mass deportation. Andre, quickly, I want to get your take on that. I guess I'm not getting Andre.
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm still here.
Oh,
Sorry,
go
I
ahead.
was trying to unmute my mic. Yeah, very interesting interview. I thought you had some really interesting points. The point that, and you kind of answered the question, but I would have asked it slightly differently about whether Caribbean governments, if they are somewhat enticed with, some things from the U.S. government to accept the deportations. I think it's actually the other way around. I think it's more, and just to go on the same theme that Mr. Warner has been, Mr. Warner raised with America bullying its way through its governorship. I don't think a Trump administration would dangle anything attractive, so to speak. I think it would be a case of force, where you may have a situation where countries in the Caribbean will refuse to accept their own nationals coming back home. And let me make that point clear, their own nationals and not citizens from other countries, as you were making the point, Jeremy, about the other islands in the Caribbean that have been asked to accept, undocumented migrants. But if countries decide that they're not going to do that, you may have a situation where relationships between the United States and that particular country could be strained. And I don't think any Caribbean country can afford having strained relationships with the United States, our biggest trading partner. So it would be a case of, and judging from the track record of governments across the region, it would be a case that if you have undocumented migrants that are going to be deported, they're just going to accept them. It's just simple, plain and simple. I think the only concern, though, that we may have is the case of maybe criminal elements coming back. I remember reading, I was looking at an article online, and I was just reading the comments this week, where a number of Kittians and divisions who live abroad and those who live here are concerned that the influx of deportations that could potentially come to St. Kitts Nevis, that you may have criminal elements in that coming. And I think that's a legitimate concern, because there are some who are involved in crime. We've seen in the past what has happened across the Caribbean, where people who are deported, not all of them, by the way, and I think a vast majority of those who are deported are really persons who just broke the immigration law or may have committed petty crimes. But they are amongst those, amongst that figure, some who would have committed serious and heinous crimes in the United States. And there's a concern that they may come and ply their trade illegally here in the Caribbean. So that, I think, is a legitimate concern, and it's something that Caribbean leaders will have to look to address. I know there's a CARICOM meeting coming up soon, so that's something that has to be on the top of their list.
So, Warner?
One of the advantages of being as old as I am is having reference to history. As a child, I can recall that when there were changes of administration in the United Kingdom, which had plans to, and usually it was when the Conservatives got elected, and indicated that they intended to restrict the flow of migrants from the Caribbean to England. And of course, remember, most of these people were going there for work. Well, all of them were going there for work. What happened? The leaders of the Caribbean countries would get together and have meetings and plan a unified approach to the United Kingdom with regards to the proposed changes that they were making. This is what Caribbean leaders should do today. They should have a unified approach to the United States with regards to these issues. Otherwise, we will be picked off one by dangling carrots here and there. Why is it that the United States, the only country in the world other than Israel, which insists on having, I think there might be one or two more now, insists on having restrictions against Cuba? Why have they been so unsuccessful? Because the rest of the world said, look, we don't give a damn what you say. We are going to trade with Cuba. And so St. Kitts, Nevis, Dominica, Jamaica, all these islands of the Caribbean trade freely with Cuba with no penalty against St. Kitts, against them, because we are a unified group. That's what we ought to do. Now, the subject of citizens of these countries being sent back, hey, we really don't have a choice but to accept them. But when it comes to being asked to accept the citizens of other countries because they won't accept them, I don't want to spoil the language of your worthy program, but the attitude of Caribbean countries should be, hell no, we won't say yes. Because yet again, this is a case of the United States saying, we must have our way. Does anyone realize that the United States has an approach that says, when you commit a crime in your country that affects the United States of America, we reserve the right to come and do whatever we can in order to get you to face trial in the United States of America? Yet, when people commit crime, when Americans commit crimes that directly affect people in other countries, somehow all of their rights are considered to be protected, etc. You know, we can't continue to let it be done by this. The fact that the United States is being managed today by a bully and someone with long-standing autocratic, not ambitions, but no realizations, doesn't mean that we should cower in fear. It means that what we say, unity is strength. Caribbean countries should stand up together, and even though we may be picking amongst ourselves, trying to attract this and that as far as investment, when it comes to the unjust proposals that are being proposed by the United States, we should stand up and push back.
I agree with that because we didn't play the clip, but one of the executive members of one of the marches over the weekend, she actually said the same thing. You know, she used the term bullying and also autocracy. But some of the people who were part of a recent march, they also indicated that they used the phrase, or the word rather, dictatorship. But what we have found is that a lot of people who, and this might be a little bit blunt to put it, that a lot of people who supported him may not necessarily have understood what it was happening. But before I go back to you, Mr. Warner, we have a caller on the line. Caller, good morning. Caller, good morning.
Hi, good morning. I'm calling from the U.S. This topic is quite interesting, but I won't dwell too much on the birthright citizenship. But I'm here listening with interest, and one of the things I think that's going to happen for going forward for people who are going for visas, they might try to make an amendment or make a change to the application, whereby they might say, for females, I don't know if you apply for males, because males now have husbands, people who are going for visitors visa, they might want to say, people might have to go through like a pregnancy test or something, because or the other option, you might have to come to the U.S. as soon as you find out you conceive, like maybe a day after.
Well, just to add, Carla, I don't want to cut you, but just to add to what you're saying, there was a document, a cable, you know, they send normal cable to cable from the U.S. government to the embassies. And one of the questions that, one of the ideas or initiatives that was said in the document from Congress was that you cannot ask directly whether or not a woman is pregnant unless there's some major concern. This is what was part of the embassy's cables that was sent in a document. But go ahead.
Well, it's either that or they might just start to deny people, you know, maybe for whatever reason. Then if, you know, if that's our right, they might just start to deny people. As if they're trying to get out people, I don't think they might want to, people might just be wasting money, like going to get visas and that kind of thing. Or they might be tight, they might give some and they mightn't give some, so I don't know. But I just thought the topic is very interesting. I usually listen to Freedom, but I don't know. I switched to Win FM today.
Well, thank you, Carla.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye. Yeah, yes, Mr. Warner.
That lady's comment is quite important. Let's remember, no one, when you hear people say, I'm going down Barbados to get me visa, it's not your visa. The United States of America and any other country, St. Kitts and Nevis, you name it, has the right to determine who should visit their countries. I recall a young lady telling me that she turned up for her interview in Barbados, and they denied her a visitor's visa because they said, A, you're a single, childless woman. Well, you're a single woman. B, you're childless. C, you live with your parents. D, you have no debt. E, you have a college degree. You are probably the perfect candidate to go to the United States on a visitor's visa and not return. She was extremely disappointed, but those are the facts. The consular officials will use their own discretion to make decisions on these matters.
Okay, and I agree with that because I think I recently read somewhere that once an overstay rate is at a certain percentage, then they really start to clamp down on those countries. Andre, we kind of out of time. We just have about 3 minutes left here. About if you can give us some parting words.
Yes. Well, thanks again, Jermaine, for having me on. Well, like I said, I've said it more than once during the show. I think we're in for some interesting times ahead. The citizenship, birthright citizenship issue is going to be a major battle in the courts. We'll see how that pans out, and we'll see how the economic proposal, the economic plans rather, that President Trump has, how well they will work for the United States and by extension the rest of the world, including us here in St. Kitts Nevis. We hope for the best. I think we've had a lot of challenges globally in the past 4 or 5 years. There was some sense of recovery in the last couple of years. It would be quite unfortunate if that progress was somewhat, there'll be a setback if that happens from the policies that Donald Trump is proposing. So we'll just have to hope for the best, as I'm hearing more and more American pundits are now saying, even those who don't support Donald Trump, they're wishing for his best, for the best for him and for his governance, because if America succeeds, the entire country succeeds. And I will now add to that, the entire world will benefit as a result. So we just hope for the best.
And Mr. Warner, you have the final word.
I echo Mr. Huey's sentiments. We hope for the best. We have 3 years and 51 weeks to go.
All right, Mr. Warner, thanks. Well, I'm optimistic that sometime within the next 2 years, that there's going to be some shift. So I prefer a split government in the United States. That's just me. So yes. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us today for Inside the News. I'm Jeremy Abel, your usual host. On Saturday mornings, we were joined by Mr. Schneidman Warner, accountant and economist, and Andre Huey.
Correction, I am not an economist.
You're not an economist, Mr. Warner?
No, sir. I may know a little about economics, but I am not an economist. Accounting is my field of endeavor, sir.
Okay, I'll say he's really good with numbers.
Why not just call me a social commentator?
You go beyond being a social commentator.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Mr. Warner, thanks. We were joined by President of the Media Association, CEO of Palm Branch Media, as well as owner of SKN Newsline. Do enjoy the rest of your weekend until next week, where we'll join you again with more discussions. The headline news is up next.